disorders neurologist. I'm a movement disorder neurologist. I am a chair for APPNA Merit for 2021, which is the Committee on Medical Education, Research, Information, and Technology Transfer from APPNA. And we have many initiatives going on. And one of these initiatives was to promote research and innovation in Pakistan in healthcare. And as part of that, we designed these series of webinars. Initially, the idea was a learning exercise for ourselves. We wanted to do these sessions so that we can learn as APPNA Merit Committee members on what is going on in Pakistan in innovation and healthcare research and meet all the leadership. And then we thought, why not make it open for everyone? So everybody gets a chance to hear what we hear and make notes like we do, and also get to know the leadership like we do. So you all are seeing what we're seeing, and we're making notes and we're making connections, and we're trying to find various avenues of collaborations and promoting healthcare research and innovation in Pakistan. And it's amazing so much that we have learned. There is so much going on in Pakistan that we are not aware of. It is very impressive. And I think we are at the right moment, at the pivotal moment, to really make a huge breakthrough in research. We can really leapfrog many of the things that the West had to do to serially progress. We don't have to do a serial progression. We can leapfrog and do saltatory or jumping kind of a progression and bypass many of the things that lessons learned for the West. So that's great. That's very exciting. So these are the series of webinar. Let me start with some house rule. The webinars are approved for AMA Category 1 CME. Our first block of 12 weeks is completed. We're now doing the paperwork to issue the CMEs for the people who attended our first 12 weeks of webinar. The main thing you have to do is to complete a survey. We have to have a survey feedback on the quality of these webinars to be able to issue the CME. That's a requirement. And then we will send you a link to get your CME, which is AMA Category 1 CME. And if you need anything else, like a specific recognition or a letter or something, please reach out to us at appnamerit@gmail.com. We would love to honor you and love to recognize that you were part of it, and then you presented, or you were attending all of these and participated, and we're happy to recognize any of your time and effort that you're giving us. These webinars are made possible by the generous donation of APPNA RISA Committee, which is a Research and Scientific Affairs Committee tasked with the education of APPNA members within US. And APPNA RISA Committee is paying all the cost of these CME that we have to pay for issuing them. So that's why these webinars are free. Because of their generous donation. I'm very thankful to the chair of RISA Committee, Dr. Adil Bhatt, Professor Adil Bhatt, who has been instrumental in doing this for first time ever in Pakistan, in a merit committee that we have been supported and donated by another committee. So that's wonderful. I'm really thankful to them. This is a CME program, so we always ask our audience to disclose any associations they have. The associations are not automatically negative. It's just that it's important so that if we feel that you might be biased, we need to know that why you might be biased and what might be influencing your thoughts and ideas. So those disclosures are done. The presentations, we request that on second page, their disclosures are there. But still, if there is any concern, reach out to us. We can share any disclosures that we have related to a person or speaker or panelist. And yes, many of them have affiliations, and that not necessarily are bad. And many of the time that is a good thing. We do invite industry leaders to talk about their perspective on what's missing and what should be present. And that is not an endorsement of any particular industry or a person or an institution. It's just for knowledge sharing and for learning together that we are inviting them and having them present. We will, after the presentation from our worthy speaker today, we will open up the floor for discussion. We have our own panelists from Merit Committee who can ask questions, make comments, and any of you can post questions in the chat box and also raise your hand, and I will give you the microphone at the end to make your comment or ask your question and introduce yourself. Introduce yourself in the chat box. Please write about who you are so everybody can see where you're from, which institution, and anything else that you would like to share. If you want to be a speaker or panelist on a session, or you want to recommend someone, please send us an email on appnamerit@gmail.com. This is an open platform for everyone. We just take all comers as they come. We may have to, now that we're getting so busy, we have more than 30 speakers queued up for the next presentations. We might have to start doing some strategic decisions on who to be given the platform first and second. But so far, we have made every effort not to do it and not to become a filter for everyone, and be able to take everyone who comes in and give them the next available. With that, let me start with the introduction of our speaker for today. I'm really, really pleased and excited to have a true, thorough researcher as part of our speaker, a first true, thoroughbred researcher, Dr. Sarfaraz Hasni. Dr. Hasni is Director of Lupus Clinical Research and part of NIH Intramural Research Program in Bethesda, Maryland. NIH is the National Institute of Health. It's similar to National Institute of Health in Pakistan, but with one key difference is that all research dollars or research money from the government is actually channeled through NIH. Research, which is different in Pakistan, and where that is being channeled through HEC, which is a slightly different arrangement. So Professor Hasni is the director of the research center. He is part of the National Institute of Arthritis, Musculoskeletal and Skin Diseases, NIAMS, which is one of the component institute of National Institute of Health. He did his postgraduate training in internal medicine and rheumatology from the State University of New York in Stony Brook, and a Master of Health Sciences in Clinical Research from Duke University. That's a very, very worthy training. Dr. Hasni conducts several proof of concept clinical trials based on discoveries which are primarily made at NIH. He's the core teaching faculty of the Rheumatology Fellowship Training Program and a mentor of the National Research Mentoring Network, NRMN, and I'm actually one of the mentee or member of NRM, and I thank Dr. Hasni for being one of the mentors there. He has established a regional network for advancing clinical research in systemic lupus erythematosus, SLE, called the DC Lupus Consortium, or DCLC. He's an advisory member of the Lupus Research Alliance for COVID vaccines, American College of Rheumatology designated expert on call, and research advisor of Arthritis Care Foundation, chairperson for the Scientific Review Committee on Lupus Research Programs of the U.S. Department of Defense, and congressionally directed medical research programs, and co-chair for Clinical Research Committee of Assembly of Scientists. So Dr. Hasni has been invited to present his research in multiple regional, national, international conferences, grand rounds, patient summits, and has been receiving several awards for his work. He has authored more than 50 publications and book chapters, and it's a pleasure to have Dr. Hasni talk to us about developing clinical research program and what resource might be present, which is need of the hour in Pakistan. With that, let me give the floor to Dr. Hasni. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Danish, for that kind introduction. And first of all, I would like to thank and appreciate all the effort. And I know it's a lot of effort to put these together through Danish and the rest of the team of APPNA Merit, and it's a really commendable effort. And one of my things which are very close to my mind and my heart is to have a research database or research infrastructure developed in Pakistan. And I've, in some limited capacity, have been doing this, but obviously with an organization like APPNA, things can go much more ahead. And I've been attending these lectures, and they're truly high quality lectures. And I've personally learned a lot from attending these lectures every Saturday. And it's really a pleasure. And I'm very honored and humbled that Danish and the committee asked me to present here. Again, welcome to everyone, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, based on wherever you are joining from. And I know people are joining from various time zones. One of the good things about online lectures or online webinars is that it's easier to establish, as Danish just said, and we just have one too many. But at the same time, one of the caveat is that you don't see your audience, and you don't know who is in your audience. So the reason I'm saying that right now is that for some of you who are fairly advanced in your research endeavors right now, it may look a little bit rudimentary to you. Some of the things may be appropriate for you, but the reason I put this together, this talk, is sort of have a go-to resource if somebody who would like to embark upon a journey of clinical research, or if they are somewhere in the middle of their journey and they are looking for some resources. And again, these are all my ideas or how I thought about it. And obviously, there could be 100 different ways of putting this together. So I just thought that maybe I can just put these together and then have this available as a resource. If you are starting it out, you can go through these steps and then look at some of the resources. And then at the very end, I have added some of the ideas. Those are simple sort of low-hanging fruits where you can, you don't need a whole lot of effort, but at least you can get your feet wet and start doing things like that. So in terms of research. So with that, let me just start sharing my my presentation, and I'm hoping that I'm doing the right one. And
Yes.
Even, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Okay. So so the title or the task given to me by the committee was to how to be a clinical researcher and the available resources. And let me see. Okay. So the disclosures are, of course, I'm a US federal government employee and I don't make a whole lot of money because of that. So I don't have any financial conflicts of interest. And these views are my personal views, and they are not any way endorsement or official statements from the National Institutes of Health here in Bethesda, Maryland. So before we go there, I just want to kind of put the framework in terms of what are the objectives of this talk. Some of the things I've already talked about, but just to kind of establish a framework. So most important question is that why do we even want to do research? And of course, there is no one answer to this question, and all of you will have a different answer or maybe a combination of answers. So I do want you to start sort of thinking that why you're here, why do you want to do research, what is it that the clinical research means to you. In the second part, I'm gonna walk you through these 8 steps of clinical research. And again, this is not like the 7 habits of highly successful people or something like that. It's just what I thought about it. And of course, you can agree or disagree or add to this, but this is just my personal sort of roadmap to clinical research. And then I try to provide some of the resources. Of course, there are hundreds of resources available. Anyone can do Google search and find these resources. But I just put out some pertinent resources, and like I said, there are plenty of others. And then at the end, I would present few of the ideas for our clinical research, as I said. But before we do all of this, I do want to share a little video with all of you. And this is a video about the Discovery Channel coming to the NIH where I work, and they did a 3-part of this the video. Some of you may have watched it and some of you not. So I'm just showing you the trailer of this video, which is about like a 1 minute that I would like to share with you. And this is basically Jim Parson, who some of you will know from the TV show and know him as Sheldon. And he was here, and then the whole team was here, and then they did a remarkable job in terms of doing this. So it was called First in Human. And let me see if I can share this video with you all. Okay, is that the one? No. Here it is. So can you all see it now?
Yes.
I'm in a laboratory that's part of the largest hospital in the world dedicated solely to research, the National Institutes of Health's Building 10. Imagine you're diagnosed with a life-altering condition, like cancer or diabetes or heart disease. Your doctor recommends a standard course of treatment, and you breathe a sigh of relief knowing medicine has something to offer. You are comforted knowing that so many others have already benefited from it. But where did that pill or therapy come from? For every treatment we rely on today, there was a moment when no one knew if it would work, and a first brave patient volunteered to try it. what's called a first-in-human trial. Now, for the very first time, the NIH has allowed cameras to follow these patients and doctors on their remarkable journey. I'm Jim Parsons, and this is First in Human.
Okay, so I'm sure you are able to appreciate why we do clinical research, and that was one of the reasons to show this, to sort of build this momentum in terms of why it is important. And of course, it all comes down to helping patients and making their lives better. So So the question I wanted to pose to the audience, and again, this is not mutually exclusive answers, but why are you or I am interested in doing clinical research? And there are a number of answers that we can give depending on where you are in terms of your career or what is your driving force. So either it is due to intellectual curiosity, or it is part of your career advancement, financial gains, even though you don't make a whole lot of money doing clinical research, and it's a labor of love, and except that if you are in a big pharmaceutical and you're doing a large phase 3 trial, sometimes you do make money, but that doesn't happen quite often. And discover new and better therapies. That's sort of the goal, that we like to make sure that our patients are treated better. Developing research infrastructure in Pakistan, I think that is the goal from the APPNA Merit Committee, and they're doing a tremendous and remarkable job with that. The clinical practice based on data generated by local population. And this is the point that drives me, because when you look at the clinical studies, when you look at their clinical trials coming out in New England Journal or other reputable journals, the most of the population is either Caucasian or sometimes even some of the North American and European, and sometimes there is a mix of some Hispanic and some Asian. But we do genuinely lack the data from the Indian subcontinent, from Pakistan, and even though we use the data generated by doing research on populations which are very much different than us, but then we are using the same data to make our clinical decisions. So I think there is a lack of data generated by our own population doing clinical research to find out what are the genetic factors, how do our patients respond to certain medications, and how do they don't respond. Is the same dose of a blood pressure medication which is effective in a patient who's Caucasian will be the same dose of medication or same medication that can be used in a patient who is, for example, from Hyderabad, Sindh, or from Rawalpindi, Punjab, or so forth. So as you know, I'm sure most of you appreciate that there is a difference in how different populations do respond to different medications or treatments, and of course there is a social construct to it, and there are so many other factors that we don't even embark upon. But at least there is a lack of data that we do need to generate that data from our local population. And there could be other reasons, and if you have a specific reason that I have not listed here, please feel free to put that in the chat box, and of course I'll be happy to discuss more at the end of the talk. Now with that, let's just talk about some more tangible, some more substantial things in terms of what are the 8 steps of clinical research. Again, these are just what I thought about it and kind of write it down. So this is somebody who just want to start clinical research, if they're early in their career, a medical student or an early intern or resident. So I just put it down here as the first thing is that everything starts with an idea. And then we'll talk about all these things a little bit more in detail. The second part is the literature review or the background to sort of see if your idea is even novel. Then having a question or a hypothesis. Then after that, you develop a study protocol, because clinical research is all about thinking about things systematically in an organized manner, and then following them in an organized manner based on a study protocol. So it's not something that you or I thought about in the middle of the study that, oh, this is how I should do it. No, we have to follow the protocol. That is like the number one thing that if you're coming from a large clinical background going to a research background, you have to sort of make that mental switch, that how do you follow something that is written, even though it may or may not make a whole lot of sense, but you have to follow the protocol. Then the other thing is about the resources, and we talk a lot about funding, but I do want to discuss a little bit about the human resources. And then the next step is the regulatory approval. And I'm very happy to see that a lot of progress has been made in Pakistan in that aspect. We just recently established a collaboration between NIH and one of the institutes in Lahore, Punjab, and I was very pleased to see that how they are following the international standards of regulatory approval. Then implementation, of course, that is the next step once everything is approved. And then finally, when you're done, you do analyze the result, and most importantly, you would like to publish. But I do want to emphasize one point, which is again coming to the literature review and background, that this, especially when I review a lot of grants, or when I see the students coming to me, this is the part that is often overlooked or neglected. But in my mind, and I'm sure a lot of colleagues who are involved in research will agree that this is in fact one of the most important part. That's sort of before you go on to anything else, this is the thing that you need to spend most of the time to understand what is the knowledge gap, and what is it that your idea that you're presenting, how is that idea going to fulfill that knowledge gap. So this is something I cannot emphasize enough. So now looking at these steps in a step-by-step manner. So the first step is the idea. So the question is that where do the ideas come from? And of course, when you're in clinical practice, you're looking at the patients and you see something intriguing and you say, okay, this is a knowledge gap that I don't know how to do this better, or is there a better way of treating this patient? And of course, that's where you come. And then reading the journals, reading the different research that has been published, then you say, okay, there is something that they have identified, but they are not able to completely answer this question. So maybe there is a knowledge gap. This is where the idea come from, and all of these coming together. And the third thing is that discussing with your colleagues, going to the conferences, having an interactive and curious mind. And this is how the ideas come to your mind, and then you come up with an idea to answer a specific question. So nothing too fancy about it. Now, the literature review or background, coming to the point that I was trying to emphasize again. So there are a number of resources that are available. If I look outside my window right now, I can see the building of the National Library of Medicine, and the National Library of Medicine is where the PubMed is housed, and PubMed is one of the biggest resources for for doing clinical research. And even though it is housed right here in the campus where I am sitting right now, but the resources are freely available for rest of the world. And any of you, since I have access to pretty much every article, every journal, due to my job, if any of you would need some article or are doing literature review or research and they're stuck, please shoot me an email, contact me. I'll be more than happy to send you those, download the articles and send it to you if, let's say, you don't have access to a particular article that you would like to read. But in addition to PubMed being the biggest source and freely available source for research, there are other things such as the Web of Science, the Elsevier have this Scopus, there are EUNet, and multiple other resources. But one thing I was pleasantly surprised is Google, actually, even though we sort of tongue-in-cheek say that, okay, go and search it on Google. But to be very honest, I found Google to be a very good resource for doing literature review and background. And a lot of time when you put the search, the power of Google search engine is so much that it actually provides you better results or returns better results as compared to PubMed. So so sometimes when I get stuck and I'm not getting the search results that I'm looking for, if I go to Google and then I use those results to search something, go back in PubMed. So not something to be undervalued. You know, and of course there are many other resources, but these are what I thought could be one of the few of the important resources, and most of them are free. Okay, so now we have the idea, we did the literature review, we see what is the knowledge gap that we would like to fulfill with our research. What is the third thing? So the third thing is stating the question and hypothesis. And the research idea, again, it's all about being organized, about thinking systematically, about having yourself a structure. So the idea has to be structured into a well-built question or a hypothesis. One of the ways to sort of organize your thought is to think about this PICO components. So the PICO, what does it stand for? So it stands for the population of interest. So what is the population of interest that you would like to study? That is the number one question that you answer. Then the intervention that you would like to be tested, whether the intervention is a medication, intervention could be an exercise, intervention could be even a behavioral intervention, or some type of educational intervention. Intervention does not always mean a drug. So it could be anything. And then the third part is the comparison strategy. So you want to test your intervention in one, and then you want to have a same population where you don't have the intervention, and then you compare so that you see whether your intervention have some results based on this comparative strategy. And then of course the last thing is the outcome. So what is the outcome that you're trying to find? What are the outcome that you're looking for, and how do you define those outcomes? So framing your question in this manner helps. And again, this is not the only way to do it. This is just one way of doing this, which I thought may be pertinent to give you some tangible ideas. Now, going to the fourth step is the writing the study protocol. And a study protocol is probably not something which is the strongest forte of any of us. And I also struggled with this initially when I started on it. And eventually it took me a while. But fortunately, there are a number of resources available to write a study protocol. So at the NIH, the IRB has actually publicly established this website, which is the my first bullet point here, which is the irbo.nih.gov. And if you go to that website, they have freely available all these resources where you can have various templates. So for example, if you're doing an interventional study, there is a template for that. If you're doing a natural history type study, if you're doing just some biospecimen, if you're doing some behavioral study. So all of those templates are there, and you can use them as a guide to write your study protocol. Of course, things have to be in a local perspective. So some of the things that are applicable only for the US may not be applicable for Pakistan or UK or other places. And those are small parts, the regulatory parts of the protocol. The most of the bulk of the protocol is pretty much similar. I review grants from a lot of European countries. For example, I reviewed grant recently from Finland and also UK. And I was very surprised to see that their their study protocol structure was pretty similar to what the one used in US. Some of the other tools I have listed here are the e-writing tool, which again helps you write a protocol. So you can just go to this website and then you can start. It will help you write the protocol electronically. Then I also find a resource from NHS in UK, and they also have some of the resources available where these templates and so forth. And of course, there are several others that I did not list, but you can of course search and find out. Now going to the fifth step, which I think a lot of us get stuck on and feel that we don't have the resources to do research. But I do want to kind of challenge that notion, and I would like to propose to you that we do indeed have a lot of resources, and we have a very large pool of resources. And the reason I'm saying is that the research is not always just the funding. And what do I mean by that? So what I mean is that the number one resource that we need to do research is human resources. And I think in Pakistan, alhamdulillah, we have such a rich resource of human resource. We have no breadth of talent. We have extremely talented people. It's just that we just don't have the proper infrastructure to nurture that talent. And I think again, coming back to praising APPNA for starting this series so that they can develop some of that infrastructure and make people aware of the resources available to do research. So if, let's say, for example, you are somebody who just started, want to start clinical research. So how do you develop your research skills? How do you develop that human potential? How do you develop the skills from being a clinician or from a medical student or an intern? How do you go on that journey? And I have taken that journey myself, so I can vouch for that, that it's not an easy journey. Again, it's a labor of love. It takes time, but at the same time, if I can do it, I'm sure any of you can do it. So it's not impossible, it's difficult. But there are resources available, and please use these resources. And if you need any more resources, I please feel free to contact me. I'll be more than happy to guide you, to provide you more resources. So one of the things, one of the books which I would recommend all of you must read before you start clinical research is this book. Is by Steve Hulley and colleagues, and it's called Designing Clinical Research. And it's sort of like a very stepwise approach. It starts from a point zero and take you all the way to the end. And if you read this book, and also you can use this as a reference. Another book which I would recommend to all of you to read is The Principle and Practice of Clinical Research. And it's written actually by John Gallen, who's the head of the clinical research at the NIH. And there are multiple people here who are part of the NIH and also around the world who contributed to this. It does cover a vast number of topics, and it gives practical advice to both novice and advanced clinical investigators. And it is as sort of an essential resource for you. And it also gives a lot of hands-on practical suggestions, illustrations, examples, and so forth. So these two books I would highly recommend all of you to please get hold of them. Okay. Now, second part is some of the courses. The NIH has a lot of free resources in terms of courses that you can go and do, and now everything is available online. So one of this course, which is the Principles and Practice of Clinical Research, is an excellent resource. And this is a course that is developed by the NIH, and it is taught in more than 140 countries, more than 140 universities around the world. It used to be a very only a on-demand, only a resource where you can only log on at a certain time. And now what they have done is that it's an on-demand format. So you, as long as you go and register, and again, it's all free. All you need is a Gmail account that you can go and register, and then you can either register as an institute or as an individual. And you go through all these resources, about like 40 lectures, and then which from the world-class experts actually. And once you complete it, there is an exam that you need to take, and if you do 75% or better in scoring on that exam, then you get a certificate of completion. And this is a certificate which is highly valuable as a clinical researcher, and kind of establishes that you are indeed, you have taken the time to learn about clinical research. And then the other, this is more like a training modules where it just sort of trains you in terms of various aspects of clinical research, in terms of what are the regulatory aspects, what are the ethical concerns. And so some of it is overlapping with the course, but the modules, again, the modules are needed, at least in the US, these modules are needed for and for you to be established as a clinical research. So anyone who does clinical research in United States, and I'm sure in other places in the world, they have to do these modules and pass these modules, which gives them a certificate. And once you go to the regulatory authority, they say, okay, you are coming to us saying that you want to do research. Tell us that you have the skills, or you have learned enough to do the clinical research. And that's how you get established doing this, by doing these modules. Again, it's free. I've given the link here. You can go onto that link and register yourself and do these modules. It takes about like 6 hours to complete all 4 of them. And there is a quiz. And if you score 80% and above, then you get the certificate of completion. Again, it is free. So all of these resources are freely available. They're highly valuable resources. Okay. So now we have the idea, we did the background search, wrote the protocol, and we have all the knowledge and skills in terms of human resources. So what is the other part that you need? So you need to have, in addition to you yourself or your team having the skills, you also need certain infrastructure. So you need people who are research coordinators who can help make sure that the protocol is being followed, and and a lot of times these are institute-based things that are needed. And I believe that having a data manager is also very important for somebody to kind of collect the data and enter the data. Having a biostatistician is also important. And again, if for example, the one way the NIH and other institutes do these things is that they develop a core. So they have a data manager core, they have a biostatistician core, and you are a research coordinator core, and so that you can pool your resources. So for example, there are 10 people doing clinical research, and there are 2 research coordinators, so they can dedicate their time to these 10 different people if they're not too busy. And same example is a data manager who can support 10 different researchers, or a biostatistician who can support multiple researchers. So this is not something that you need a research coordinator for each and every study and so forth. Then you need to have a research database. And again, the REDCap, I'm sure a lot of you already know about REDCap. But REDCap is an open source, freely available research database. And anyone from anywhere in the world can register with REDCap, and they can use their infrastructure for building their own research database. And there is another one, which is the nnlm.gov. There is also data tools there that you can use. So these are again freely available, but these are the infrastructure things that you need. And then of course you need the physical space, you need computer software, you need labs. If you're doing bench research, which I think we're most talking about clinical research, but at least you need to have some physical space, you need to have software, which I'm sure pretty much all of you would have. But I do want to emphasize the 2 things that I've circled on the left. Then the third part of having resources is the funding, which I think a lot of us kind of wonder. But I think even though we get kind of bogged down with funding, but for a lot of things that I may tell you a little bit later, you may not need a whole lot of funding. So national resources, as Danish initially said, is the HEC is the biggest funding resource in Pakistan, and I'm sure all of you already know this. The Pakistan Health Research Council, then the Pakistan Science Foundation, they also give grants for clinical research. And interestingly, the British Council in Pakistan also gives grants for clinical research. And I believe a few lectures back, there's somebody who did present a lot of resources that are available, but I just listed a few of them. The international resources, the Fogarty Center in the NIH is one of the biggest resource for international research. Some of the institutes in Pakistan, especially Aga Khan and some other institutes, have been funded heavily through the Fogarty International Center. They have successfully competed for grants. Then there are industry-based. Of course, the investigator-initiated research is one way to do this, and I have successfully received funding based on investigator-initiated research. And then also there is this joining a multi-site clinical trial. And the reason I put this in red is that I think this is probably the most tempting or easiest way of doing clinical research. But I do want to, I shouldn't say that I want you to steer you away from this, but I want you to say that, don't think that you have to do clinical research just joining a multi-site clinical trial. There are so many other things that you can do. It's a labor of love. You need to put in some time and effort. But if you can resist the temptation of starting out by joining a multi-site clinical trial, I think in the long run, you will be much more, you have much more skills. And then then actually you don't look out for the pharmaceutical, they keep on reaching you. I mean, for example, I almost on a weekly basis get approached by multiple companies because they want me to be involved in the research. Of course, that's not what I want to do, but at the same time, once your portfolio goes out there, then they are always looking for people like who can do clinical research. And then there are multiple foundations. I mean, the most familiar to most of you is the Bill and Melinda Gates, but of course there are multiple other foundations that give out research. Then the disease-specific organization, for example, the American Heart, the Alzheimer's Association, and so forth. All right. So, so those are the resources that are available. And of course, like I said, they're all available. You can do Google search and then you can find all of these resources, but this is something that's for a reference. Then the step 6 is the clinical research, or is the study approval. So the regulatory approval, again, I was pleasantly surprised that Pakistan has done so much progress in that aspect. There are, so, it's important that it's not only important, essential that anytime you're embarking on human subject research, it needs to be approved. It is required before starting research study, and any type of research you're doing, either it's a retrospective, prospective, observational, or interventional, you need it to be approved. And why it needs to be approved? Because there are ethical issues. You want to make sure that there is a do no harm, or freedom from harm. There is a right to withdraw, that anonymity, confidentiality, informed consent. These are the key ethical issues. And of course, this is outside of the scope of this talk to talk about these. But I do want to sort of bring this point that when we are doing research, not only it's important that we follow the protocol, we want to make sure that we follow the highest ethical issues, because if somebody is volunteering to be a research subject, we want to make sure that we do protect them and follow these ethical concerns. And then the seventh step is the implementation. Once you have everything developed, you have to develop the data collection form, the database, the spreadsheet, REDCap being one of those. And then you need to follow the written procedures as outlined in your protocol, and make sure that the data is accurate and complete. Because when you're doing research, you have to be very obsessive compulsive. You need to make sure that you have procedures in place for checks and balances, and there has to be almost zero tolerance for any kind of error, because it's a very high bar and very high standard. Of course, as professionals, we always follow very high bar. We have a very high bar, and we all hold ourselves accountable to a much more higher standards, because we're dealing with human life. But in clinical research, there's an added element to that. And then you want to make sure that you are on an ongoing basis, make sure that your protocol has been adhered. There are organizations who do that for you. I'm not sure how much of that is available in Pakistan, but in US, there are organizations who just make sure that you are adhering to the protocol, and they give sort of an audit report based on their review of your site. Okay, the last step is to present and publish your results. So, just sort of put this as a joke, but I think that some of you who are involved in clinical research know this very well, that publish or perish. So you want to make sure that whatever you have done, you are publishing it, and when you're coming from your idea, going to your research, going to analyze the result, then write and make sure that you publish. So all this will perish. All these steps will perish if you don't publish. And once you publish, then you repeat and you do this, and this is a cycle that you keeps going on and on and on. And of course, it has multiple benefits. Again, not an easy task, but make sure that that whatever results you have, you publish them. Okay. So again, these are the 8 steps. I just put them out there just as a refresher. So starting with idea, literature review, and writing a question in a scientific method, and then writing the protocol, then human resources and funding, regulatory approval, implementation, analyzing result, and publishing. Okay. So in the next few minutes, I just very quickly want to go through some of the ideas about clinical research. So we talked about the 8 steps. We talked about how we can establish ourselves with clinical research, what are some of the resources that are available, and we sort of begin with the framework where we wanted to see why even we want to do this. So after doing that, I thought that it would be maybe a good idea to leave you guys with some of the ideas and some of the sort of the low-hanging fruit, where you don't need to have a whole lot of resources and effort, but it's still at least start some kind of a clinical research process. So so what are some of those ideas? So so one thing which has helped me a lot in my career, and a lot of people that I know, their career got established as a clinical researcher by establishing a disease registry. And I think that is something that we do lack in Pakistan. My push with some of my colleagues in Lahore that I've been working on is to establish a lupus registry or maybe an autoimmune disease registry, because that's what I do research in. But even for other diseases, I'm not sure if there are disease registries, for example, for diabetes, for high blood pressure, for hepatitis C, for the diseases which are so much prevalent in Pakistan. But establishing a disease registry is very helpful, because it does, you do collect data in a uniform fashion related to patients with a specific diagnosis. You develop some standard clinical data collection form, and you can track their clinical care and outcome for chronic disease. And it doesn't take a whole lot of effort. So it's basically a low cost, high impact research. It doesn't have to be a very fancy, big. If you have access to, for example, Microsoft Excel or Microsoft Access, you can easily establish a registry. Again, RedCap is freely available. You can go to RedCap and it will help you establish a disease registry. And if you are able to dedicate some time to establishing a registry of whatever disease that you are interested in, whatever the disease that you are expert in, it will help a lot. It will generate a whole lot of data. It can open up so many avenues for you in clinical research. For example, you can study mechanism of disease by doing something like a case control or a cross-sectional study. And in interest of time, I'm just gonna go through these real quick, but of course, I'm available and I'm happy to talk about these things more in detail. For example, establishing a case control study, it's not that hard. You define your study population here, and then you divide them in the ones who don't have the disease, those are your control, and then those who have the disease are your cases. And then you look at certain exposure, for example, blood transfusion. So you see if the cases, how many of those people who have blood transfusion have hepatitis C. So how many of them were transfused with blood, were exposed or non-exposed. Again, you look at the cases exposed and non-exposed, and then you conclude that blood transfusion is extremely safe in Pakistan, and the blood transfusion is not a source of hepatitis C in Pakistan, for example. So then again, mechanism of disease, the other way to do is a cross-sectional study. Then you're only looking at identify subjects from your population, and then again look at the risk factors and if their disease is present, if there is a risk factor but no disease is present. And then again, you have two more boxes where you say that risk factor but no disease, but then no risk factor and no disease. So you have these four parts of the population, and you can do a cross-sectional study. And again, it doesn't take a whole lot to do this. You can do a prognosis study. Again, just coming back to the point that I started out, that all of this is built upon establishing a registry. Then prognostic study, so you can follow the patients for a long time. For example, the registry that I have is a lupus study, which has been established more than 26 years ago. And we recently had a 25-year celebration where we are able to follow the patients for so long. So now we know patients who are like 17, 18 years old when they have lupus, and now they're like in their midlife, 45, 50, and now what has happened to them, what are the different exposures, what was the outcome, how many lived, how many died, how many were hospitalized, how many had renal failure, things like that. So prognostic studies can be long-term. If you are at the institute for conceivably for a long time, then you can do these type of studies. Again, this is just a pictorial way of showing that. Descriptive prevalent study, you can do maybe just a survey to find out, for example, a certain neighborhood in Karachi, what is the prevalence of diabetes, and is it different than another comparative, and whether there are socioeconomic factors that are causing more high blood pressure, diabetes, and for example, Nazamabad, Karachi as compared to Clifton, Karachi, or vice versa. So these are the things that you can do more for descriptive prevalence study. Again, doesn't take a whole lot of effort, but just need a little bit of organized thought and organized way of working on these things. Systematic review, meta-analysis, not typically you think about clinical research, but there are resources available how to do systematic review. And if you have biostatistician available, they can tell you how to do the meta-analysis or help you with that. You come up with a question and then you do the research, and there are a number of resources available. You provide a statistical analysis summary. For example, the Cochrane database of systematic reviews there, it actually teaches you how to do systematic review, and those are easy. You can just do it on your time. You don't even need to go anywhere or interact with anyone. You can do a systematic review if you have some medical students working with you, and then you can all come up together. If you have biostatistician, you can do meta-analysis and so forth. Case reports, I think a lot of you are familiar with that. If you see something unusual, which I think in clinical practice in Pakistan, there is no shortage of unique cases because of our genetic admixture, because of the consanguineous nature of our population, because of the specific environmental factors. And there's not a whole lot of data coming. I mean, there is data coming out, but we can certainly add to world literature by putting Pakistan's name on the face of clinical research by putting out these case reports. So case reports in the research community sometimes is looked down at, but in my view, I think case reports are very valuable, and they do provide an important insight into rare occurrences of common diseases. So with that, I think this is probably my last slide. Again, I would like to thank everyone, especially the organizers, for giving me this opportunity. And of course, you all will join me in saying Pakistan Zindabad, because that's where we all, that's, how we all, actually, I would say that for me, who I am and where I am is all because of my motherland, because of Pakistan. And I have this deep desire and hope and wish that I can give back and do something. And I'm very indebted to APPNA for giving me this opportunity, so that at least I can play a very small part in doing something to the country which bring me here, make me who I am at this point. And with that, I think we have some panel discussion and questions, comments, and feedbacks. And again, I'm available to provide any more resources or available for any comments or discussions. Thank you so much again for your attention. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen. And
thank you, Dr. Hasni. This was wonderful. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was very useful. It was chock full of resources, which is very, very important. So for everyone who's worried about missing all those resources, don't worry. We have started a project called 5-Minute Brief, where we publish a newsletter on every webinar that we are conducting. We're behind, but we have sent some out. But I'm making copies of all the resources being shared, including textbooks. And we will send it out as a 5-minute brief, so you have access to our newsletter with all the links to all the resources and everything. So you will get that. So don't worry about it if you miss anything. There are a bunch of questions. I have some questions too, but before I go to that and invite comments from many of our worthy panelists who are here, let me just quickly mention something. The examples that you have given as ideas for research are extremely valuable, useful, and practical and doable. And I have, a couple of examples to share just to give you an idea of that. They are very easy to do. So I have, for example, done what you mentioned as a descriptive prevalence study. So we did a large study on 7 centers in Pakistan, tertiary centers on Parkinson's disease characteristics. How are they being treated with medication? How social burden they have, what are the taboos, how it is accepted in the community or not. So we collected data for 6 months from 7 centers, and there are so many patients in Pakistan, and we published that in an epidemiology journal to talk about disease prevalence. So that was an easy project to do and something you can do. So that's my personal example. And then I know my co-chair, Dr. Shahid, has recently established a stroke registry. So it's slowly growing. Right now, I believe it's in 4 centers and going to 6 pretty soon. But the goal is to have multiple large centers. And it was so easy to establish because even the actual software of the registry was given for free to us from a European stroke registry trial, which have built a stroke registry for their own clinical trial. And we just reached out to them and we proposed that we want to do it for a national registry in Pakistan in stroke. And they said, sure, use our software. You don't have to pay us anything. And they even gave us their free time for their coordinator. And we're very excited about it, not only improving healthcare in stroke in Pakistan, but also publishing a lot of research out of it. So before I go on to question, And let me I'll remind that anybody who wants to speak, raise your hand and I'll give you the microphone to make your comment or ask your question. And let me first invite my mentor and co-chair, Dr. Shahid Rafiq, for his comments and questions. Shahid, please.
Thank you, Danish. To Sarfaraz, it's a great talk. And I recently am more interested in collaborating my age in stroke and healthcare disparity. So my question is that, are you, the stroke NIH is very isolated, like cells, like, or you interact with other departments, neurology and NIMS?
So I think there's a lot of static in your at least.
I think Dr. Hasni, if the question I understood was that within NIH you have different divisions or departments. Do you have a collaboration between them, like in NINDS, the stroke and neurology department, and so on and so forth?
Yeah, so I think that is one of the best things about NIH is that there is so much collaborative effort. And all I need is just send an email to, for example, my colleagues in NINDS or others, and they are so much more willing to collaborate and work with you. And some of them are like highly accomplished, like Nobel Prize laureates, and they will, like, for example, I work on the same floor as Tony Fauci, and I see them all the time. And if you meet him, you will be so surprised. He's such a humble person, and he will meet with everyone. And so again, there's not lecture about NIH, talk about NIH, but at the same time, I would say that we do have a lot of collaborative efforts, and especially for lupus, because neuropsychiatric lupus is something which is an enigma. So we do work very closely with our colleagues in neurology.
So
I'm big proud of you, because I have developed it where
your voice is breaking a lot. It's very hard to follow. Maybe you can type it in the chat box or relocate. Yeah.
Yes.
So let me invite Dr. Zulfikar Bhutta, who's the best person to make comments on it, being his multiple roles, including HEC and NIH. So what's your suggestions, comments, or questions, sir?
Well, thank you very much. I mean, we just had a fantastic session this morning also with Dr. Ataur Rahman talking to some of us here in north of your borders. And it was a fabulous session because he covered a lot of ground on how he's supporting health research or science research in Pakistan. So I enjoyed your presentation, Dr. Hasni. And I just want to make a couple of suggestions, if I may. One is that I think there needs to be greater support from the Fogarty program for health capacity development in Pakistan. I know that Roger Glass and before him, Jerry Kirsch, both of them tried very hard. And Jerry in particular was keen to get something done at South Asia level, but we couldn't get it going because of some of the political issues that you may be aware of. But Roger's no stranger to the region, and he's certainly been instrumental in getting a lot of support for India through India-US science initiatives and all. We need a science initiative between Pakistan and the NIH, which focuses on health research capacity development, which also allows an exchange through the Fogarty program of scholars back and forth. And it requires some ring-fenced resources with accountability to make that happen. So it doesn't have to be Aga Khan alone. I know that from my own department at Aga Khan, over the last 2 decades, we've applied thrice for Fogarty programs on research capacity development and won them every time, not because they were any exceptional programs, but they were there at the right time. So more national institutions need to come forward and build those linkages around exactly the kind of areas that you're talking about, building registries, networks, collaboratives. The second thing that I would say to you is that the sky is the limit in terms of research capacity enhancement now using digital communications. I mean, just look at how much revolution in terms of networking, webinars, web workshops has come about just in the last 1.5 years since COVID-19, because we were all forced to do that. And I don't think this model is going to change. I think after everything opens, when it opens, we will still depend upon this medium because it's so convenient and so inexpensive. Now, it can be used exactly for research capacity development, like you were talking about, teaching people remotely what the basics, nuts and bolts are. And there is one NIH program that did exactly this some 20, 25 years ago, when it did it for research ethics capacity development. So when that came about in the period around HIV trials in the early 2000s, that's exactly what the NIH did, was to create those courses, those models for certification, which even exist today, where if nothing else, somebody can take an online course over 3 or 4 hours and get yourselves an ethics certificate, which otherwise you would not get any other way. So I think we need the same for research capacity, whether it is a standalone module on what do you mean by case control studies? How can you set up a good cohort going up, and how do you cluster randomized trials? There are very specific things that can be done. And I'd like you to think about how you want to move forward. I will facilitate it as best as possible, because in the new NIH Pakistan, we are establishing by mandate, constitution, and the ordinance which has now been passed by the parliament, the Institute for Health Research. So Pakistan Medical Research Council, which became the Pakistan Health Research Council, is now the Institute for Health Research, which will be announced soon. And the two main mandates of that institute would be capacity development, ethical oversight of research funding down the road to come. So, आप इसमें पेशरफ्त करें. I mean, you are based in probably one of the best or the best research center of excellence in the world, and sky's the limit in terms of ideas. So I would encourage you to speak to Roger, give him my regards, say that this is the time, I've written to him, this is the time to be thinking practically and small baby steps, which will become then, something that we can really garner momentum on. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Bhutta, for your kind comments. Maybe we should communicate offline, and I'll be more than happy to whatever I can do in my capacity. That's my passion. That's my hope. My that I want to give back, and whatever I can do, I'll be more than happy to facilitate. Thank you so much for your comments.
So before we take some more questions from the chat box that I've made note of, let me invite someone from the audience who have raised their hand, Dr. Samia Taslim. Please go ahead and unmute yourself and then introduce yourself briefly and make your comment or give your question.
My name is Dr. Samia. I'm the consultant microbiologist and PhD in microbiology. Also working for innovation product in wound care treatment. It's the one pressure lecture I listened for Mr. Sarfaraz Hussaini. It's very wonderful. Thank you for arranging this seminar or this lecture. I have faced the one issues in Pakistan, the job crisis and different PhDs to come back to join after the complete research work and degree program. The Pakistani institution have problem to give the placement. So my advice to the government and you, if we jointly, it's a more than 7,000 PhDs is here to still jobless. So different disciplines, so make a joint pool and apply to the funding. So mostly PhDs have ability to apply the PhDs to the funding for different research groups. So we can make the big group, joint group to get the fund for this research group to serve the Pakistani local person to have the suffer different diseases. And disease management cost is very high in Pakistan. No one afforded for these costs regular basis.
Any comment? Sir, you're muted, Dr. Hasni.
Okay, no, I mean, thank you. I mean, this is a problem all over the world, actually, because even in US, there are so many postdocs. There are only limited postdoc positions, and there are so many people who need the position. But at the same time, I think your point is well taken that there needs to be more of a collaborative effort. And again, talking about building a research database in infrastructure where the universities are hiring more PhDs to help promote clinical research. I think the basic research is not as commonly taken up in Pakistan, but that it's a long, it's like, you know, the famous rabbit and the tortoise story. So basic research is the tortoise. You need, if you want to really make an impact in the world, just like how China made an impact, they invested so much heavily in basic research, and that's how they were able to. So I mean, your points are very well taken, Sana.
Let me invite a very good friend and mentor and advisor of APPNA Merit, Professor Mujtaba Qadri. I met him as the Dean of National University of Medical Sciences with his passion to build research centers and research programs. I learned a lot from him. I remember Dr. Qadri in the ORIC there used to conduct those programs, research training programs that you highlighted, Dr. Hasni, today. So Dr. Qadri, please go ahead, share your experiences and make your comment.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Danish. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Dr. Hasni. Fascinating talk, although I missed a little bit of it. But just coming back to the capacity building efforts, Danish is probably aware we've been doing these workshops, either the NIH IPPCR facilitated workshops or the clinical pharmacology or bioethics. But besides that, we have our own essentials of clinical research and that we've been doing even from Maruf Clinical Investigation Center last year and a half. And now recently I sent a position paper suggesting some capacity building efforts at the COMSTEC level for the Organization of Islamic Countries. COMSTEC, the Science and Technology wing, is chaired by Pakistan. So Professor Iqbal Chaudhry received it very well. And inshallah, just to let you know that in September, they plan to have a session online, and then in February and the following of summer, out in other countries like Uganda and Azerbaijan. But this is a great platform that hopefully what I would do is, once we finalize the details, invite some of you, the ones in panel and others, to be part of our faculty, where we have a 15 item, 5-module course, which is basically an essentials spanning bioethics and research, obviously study designs and common biostatistics and the proposal writing and the grant writing and budgeting, etc. So just to let you know that these things we've been trying to do in Pakistan last 5 or 6 years. I believe they're beginning to bear fruit because some of our workshops are attended by institutions like Indus and others who have subsequently developed some pretty meaningful clinical projects, including vaccine trials. And I think some of our the faculty members out there were part of one of our courses. Similarly, for RMI in Peshawar, we did one recently on GCP, ICP, ICA, GCP. So these are small baby steps, but I think they will have an impact, because one of the journal articles in New England Journal of Medicine, I believe in 2010, talking about the ethical and scientific implications of the globalization of clinical research, clearly talked about capacity building or lack of it as the hindrance in developing countries catching up with the developing world, with the developed world. So I think that is where we are focusing, and we are proposing that after a couple of years of training across OIC countries, I know how we look at when the word OIC comes in, but just to make it a little more practical. So once we do that, we're going to try and have a consortium of clinical trial centers. That's what we are proposing across these countries, maybe a few from Pakistan, a few from other centers. So I think besides the NIH thing that you're talking about and Bhutta Sahab alluded to, I think there are some other parallel things that are going on, and all we need to do is collaborate on that. Thank you so much, Danish, for the opportunity.
Thank you. Let me ask one quick question before I invite the next person from the audience for their comment. Dr. Hasni, this question comes up often, that how to find collaborators, how to reach out to someone who is well recognized or published in their field. And if you're starting, how to request collaboration? Should you go to them with an idea, or ask them if they have an idea that they need help? And is it okay to just reach out? And part of that question will be that is the NIH faculty able to collaborate or give suggestions or feedback? Can people reach out to you or other people in NIH for those kind of questions?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so nothing can be done without collaboration, obviously. So especially in this day and age, people need collaborators, and as much as the people who are doing researchers, they need people who are willing to help and willing to contribute also. So I think my suggestion would be to please reach out to whoever is in your field, who's doing research or who's doing research in the specific question that you are trying to answer. You'll be surprised that almost most of them will be very happy to collaborate with you. But don't go to them with blank that I want to, like a lot of time I get emails saying that I want to do clinical research, please help me. So that is very hard for me to do anything with that. But if you have something, at least you say, okay, I've done these things and this is what I'm trying to work on, can you please help me facilitate? Then it's easier. But if you just go with them and say that I'm interested in clinical research, what can I do? Then it's sort of hard for somebody to collaborate with you. I'll put down my email address in the chat. So if anyone would like to contact me, I'll be more than happy to help provide them resources or help them. If there's a grant they would like me to review, I do that a lot. I can help review their grant, to give them comments and things like that.
Wonderful. Thank you. Let me invite Syed Munawar Ali Saab to please unmute yourself and ask your question. Syed Munawar Ali.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you very much. This was a very good session and it was very informative for us as well. There is one question for Dr. Bhutta, that we have so many placebo-controlled studies for Pakistan, especially in the vaccine, but our client informed us that the NBC is not allowing to conduct the placebo-controlled vaccine study in Pakistan. I just want to know the expert opinion of Dr. Zulfikar Bhutta in the term of, or in the light of FDA, GCP and WHO guidelines, because I don't find any restriction to conduct placebo-controlled study, because we do not have gold standard yet as a use comparative vaccine study. Number two, there is no comparison between mRNA and the approved vaccines available in Pakistan. So I need expert opinion of Dr. Zulfikar Bhutta. Thank you very much.
So this is a difficult one. And I know I've been approached on this several times, so I have a different perspective in this. It reminds me of the controversy that arose about 25 years ago, in which the NIH was also involved at that time, on HIV trials in Africa. उस जमाने में इशू ये था कि अफ्रीका में HIV medications का access नहीं था, antiretrovirals का. US में they had become standards of care, and the big push at that time from scientists was to conduct trials in Africa of incremental benefit of interventions where they had a control arm, a placebo arm without treatment. So there were trials of microbicides, there were trials of drugs at times, even nutrition interventions. And it led to an enormous controversy, not only globally, but also within the US. And if some of you may remember, a major editor of New England Journal of Medicine resigned on that basis because she could not accept placebo-controlled trials where a standard of care existed. So वो trials नहीं हुए, and many of the arguments at that time from people was कि जी हमारे पास तो अफ्रीका में कोई study, कोई interventions ही नहीं है, and because Africa does not have the interventions, therefore you should permit that incremental gain, at least something before antiretrovirals become available. Now, I was in the middle of that controversy. I wrote extensively on that at that time, and my position was that incremental gain was feasible. And therefore those trials could have taken place under guidance. 25 years on, I can tell you that I was wrong. And my position on that has changed because of what I've seen. So what happened was that with J.W. Lee and others coming at WHO and the US, developing programs of PEPFAR, the interventions that were not going to be available for Africa became available in record time. Also, South Africa passed unilaterally at that time the intellectual property agreements on which it could have generic antiretrovirals, in India started manufacturing those so that they were available at a fraction of the cost that was available in the United States. One thing that I learned in that process was that there is nothing cast in stone, और जो आज का challenge है वो कल का challenge नहीं होगा. And therefore one has to do what is right for humanity and for the right cause. अब वजह ये थी placebo controlled trial ना करने की अफ्रीका में, because you would be very consciously and willingly exposing people to the risk of a disease where an intervention was available, which is life-threatening. Even if you get HIV in that environment, it was a death sentence, very different from other disorders. Now, why am I telling you this story? कि आजकल for COVID vaccines, we are facing comparable kind of arguments by people trying to argue that you should be doing trials of COVID vaccines with placebo arms, which means that willingly you're asking people to expose themselves to a virus where they would not be receiving another vaccine, but they would have other interventions. Now, you can put any form of incentive on the table, and some people may be willing to do that. But the basic reality is that this is a disorder, this is a disease that can kill people. And therefore, the risk-benefit ratio at an individual level is extremely different from what you might want to argue from a public health angle. Now, the problem is, mRNA vaccines may be, quotes unquote, the standard right now in North America. But the other vaccines that are already available in many geographies, including Pakistan, are still protective. They are more than the threshold of WHO protection, which was set at 50%. And whether or not there are breakthroughs, and breakthroughs are there, but Chinese vaccines, inactivated, as well as vector vaccines, are effective. They may not be 100% effective, but they're effective. They have an efficacy of 60, 70, that kind of percent. So, this stage pe, I'm not on the NBC anymore. I was the chair of the NBC for 13 years. I was a founding chair. So I know something about the process. But I can tell you that it is not a black and white argument. So मेरे ख्याल में जो companies इस वक्त placebo controlled trials पे insist कर रही हैं, they have to put 2-3 things on the table for the NBC to approve it. One is examples of, okay, not high-income countries, but middle-income countries where these kind of trials have been authorized and have been done with the kind of safeguards that are there. But the second more important thing is an absolute guarantee that the products of these vaccines may be available in these countries after these trials are over for all and sundry, जो कि नहीं है अभी. Just remember that Chinese vaccines के भी जो trials हुए हैं पाकिस्तान में, at the end of the day, Pakistan has had to buy those vaccines and at commercial costs, not even at preferential rates. So ये बहुत बड़ा issue है. And इसके लिए जब तक के WHO इसमें jump in करके इजाजत नहीं देता इस किस्म के trial की, जो कि वो कभी भी नहीं देंगे. I can tell you, दे ही नहीं सकते हैं. उस वक्त तक किसी national body के लिए ये approve करना बड़ा मुश्किल है. And I'm on the draft committee that's looking at some of these issues right now. And we have difference of opinion in the committee also, with some members saying कि placebo controlled trial होने चाहिए. But my fundamental principle in health research and research of this nature is as following. आप क्या अपनी family में या अपने बच्चों के साथ इस किस्म के trial में participate कर सकते हैं? अगर आप कर सकते हैं तो that's great. That means कि आप दूसरों को भी ये advice करें. अगर आप नहीं कर सकते, so then I don't think we should be pushing this forward as a model for the country. I'm sorry if I've said this in black and white, but you asked me the question.
Thank you, Dr. Bhutta, for taking this question. We are way above time, but I have 2 people raise their hand for comments. So let me quickly take them and before we wrap up for the day. So I have someone listed as Seswi DR. If you want to introduce yourself and ask a question.
Assalamualaikum everyone. My name is Dr. Sasri and I'm recently graduated 2017. I'm doing currently a master's in public health. So thank you everyone being a voice of the youth edge. So like we need support, we need guidance. So we have a vision and the vision as well. But I'm now I started working in the research of the MDR TB. And I also selected the population as well. I'm working on it. But the thing is, we have taken the one step. So what was the next step? This is the thing we people get confused. Second point, I'm also in the Sindh. Basically, I'm from the Sindh. So we people need health promotion, the quality management and the health promotion. So this is the two different targets as well. I'm working on it. So I request all of people. So if in that way we can have any kind of webinar or the guidance will be better for people like us. Thank you.
Dr. Hasni, any comments on it?
No, I think that's a wonderful point. And I think, again, we think about clinical research as giving a drug versus placebo, but there is much more to clinical research than just that. So one of the interventions could be educating. So you educate the mass, and that could also be a sort of your intervention. So those type of things are also available, I mean, and should be useful. MDR TB, I mean, that's it's a topic that is very well researched in certain parts of the world, but I think in Pakistan, maybe we need to do more research. Then start thinking about the next step. So you established it. Maybe if you email me, and perhaps I can understand a little bit better that what are you talking about in terms of taking the next step, and if I can have a better understanding of what you're doing, I can maybe help and provide you some resources and some guidance in terms of how you can take it to the next step where you are right now.
One quick comment, Dr. Saswi, is that when you're doing research, there are two things that are very important not to forget. Number one, research is being done for a certain outcome. And that in general means improving patients' health. And so it needs to be either you're helping develop ideas that will be adapted in clinical settings, or ideas that can be marketed or commercialized by an industry or institution or something. So you have to have some sense of where is this heading, who would it be useful for, who's the audience, and who will be the right target for. And the second thing is promotion. If you're doing research and nobody knows what you're doing, and you may have done the most amazing work possible, but if the right people don't know, then it's not going anywhere. And for that, you need to publish, you need to present in different conferences and abstract, and you have to present it in front of enough people that you will run into people who can use that idea either for their own research or for next step, or ask for collaboration, or ask for, okay, how can we use it for next steps. So lastly, let me quickly invite Dr. Zafar Hayat for his comments and questions before requesting Dr. Uzair to wrap it up for today. Dr. Zafar, please go ahead, unmute yourself.
Thank you very much, Danish Batisa. I'm really impressed with the presentation by Professor Zafar Hasni, Sarfaraz Hasni. It was a nice and very educating session. Learned a lot from it. I retired as professor and head of Department of Medicine from Khyber Medical College, and was Director of Research and Development, and Chairman of Medical Education, all the caps on my head for a long time. So I would just share with you that the modus operandi of how to become a good researcher, clinical researcher, and what are the needs for it, what the steps for it, is one part of it. Until and unless you see the research element in the institutions to the government health policy, because the government can rule it, and there is a lot of inertia in the clinical doctors, I must share with you, in Pakistan to involve themselves in research until it becomes an integral part of promotion of clinicians to professorial level, from special registrar and go on, assistant, associate, and professor. And if it does not include a weightage criteria in the promotion, and it is not an integral part of their CME and CPD attendance of the international and national conferences, that is to seed the research element in the teaching and the clinical care departments, and the mission statement of all the departments which are involved under universities. We did develop culture of research since the establishment of medical universities almost across the country, both in all the provinces. And there are private-based universities and there are public-based universities. But the private-based universities have excelled in research because they've got a policy and they've got regulatory authorities, and the people there have to involve themselves in research to optimize the clinical practice and patient care and medical education. But so far as the public sector is concerned, I am really depressed to have retired. And I did my level best. We have to be very truthful, remember. We cannot just say that everything is going well. We have to say a spade a spade. I think it will only be possible if, like these webinars which you have been doing to the APPNA forum, and we are very grateful to you. We are at the age when we have played our wickets, but we still are players. And that's a great job you're doing. But I think I request you that in the public sector, the researcher, the clinicians should do the private practice. I don't mind. But research must be included in the mission statement of all the institutions which are dealing with the medical education and clinical care at a higher level. I mean the tertiary and quaternary care hospitals.
Agreed, sir. Thank you so much for your wonderful comment. I agree with it. We're really over time. Let's wrap up, and let me invite Dr. Saeed Uzair Sahab to make his final comment and close the session for the day. Ji, Dr. Uzair.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sarfaraz Hasni. I'm sorry I joined a little late because I was on another webinar. I think it was very thought-provoking and, trust me, extremely useful footsteps, and how to explore the clinical research. So not taking much of the time, my question to Dr. Abadullah is, because somebody raised the issue of antimicrobial resistance and then the tuberculosis. So I just want simple comment. Do we have any bioequivalent proven local anti-tuberculosis medication available in Pakistan?
उज़ैर साहब, अगर हम फैक्ट ऑफ मैटर देखें तो इस वक्त पाकिस्तान में 3 या 4 कंपनीज हैं जो कि एंटी ट्यूबरकुलर ड्रग्स को प्रमोट कर रही हैं, and by and large primarily when these products were registered a decade before तो ये bioequivalent नहीं की, but subsequently need of the time and all the things जो कि requirement of regulatory requirement थी, now these products are bioequivalent from various regulatory authorities, and specifically I'm talking about the anti-tubercular drug. So the drugs which are available in the market, these are the bioequivalent product. One point. Second point is that all the anti-tubercular drugs, by and large, these are being provided by the government through some international procurement and some donations as well. And by and large, these products either through procurement or National Tuberculosis Program through some donation, these are the bioequivalent products available in the Pakistan.
So you mean from the WHO approved bioequivalent lab, there are just a couple of them. One is South Africa and another one is in India. So I understood clearly, but
and probably third one is in the Jordan as well. Jordan
now. Yes, because exactly. that's very important, because in the private sector, these medications are also used. So I think that we are quite overdue of the time. Thank you very much to all the participants. It was a great webinar today, and really I learned a lot from Dr. Sarfaraz. So thank you very much, all of you, and a lot of best wishes for your weekend, and see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting
Thank you
me.
so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Allah Hafiz.
Bye. Allah Hafiz.